Welcome to CivilNet. My guest today is Mr. Vahram Kazhoyan. Mr. Kazhoyan is the head of the International Organizations and Human Rights Department in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Armenia and also Secretary General of the Armenian National Commission for UNESCO. Armenia is hosting the third Global Forum against the crime of genocide on December 9 until December 11. Welcome, Mr. Kazhoyan.
Thank you.
So as I said, Armenia is hosting the Global Forum against the crime of genocide, and the country led global efforts to designate December 9 as the International Day of Commemoration and Dignity of the Victims of the Crime of Genocide and of the Prevention of this crime. Why is it so important for the Armenian government to host this forum?
Well, let's start from a little bit of history, not too remote history. I was already working at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs when, back in 1998, a colleague of mine, late Ambassador Ashot Melik Shahnazarian, who was already taking full care of the preparations of the Pan-Armenian Games, came to my office and said, listen, I have an idea. We need to propose a resolution on the 50th anniversary of the Genocide Convention. That was 1998, exactly 50th anniversary. I said, well, let's do it. I'm ready. No, he said, sorry, don't rely on me. The idea was mine. You'll have to fulfill it yourself. And that's how it basically started. Armenia presented its first resolution to the UN Commission on Human Rights on the 50th anniversary of the Genocide Convention, which was adopted by consensus. Then the same resolution, almost the same resolution, was presented the same year to the United Nations General Assembly later that year, and followed up by a resolution in 1999, again in the Human Rights Commission on the prevention of genocide, which became already a regular biannual resolution, which was tabled and adopted every 2 years. With the changes, transformations of the Commission on Human Rights, which was transformed into Human Rights Council, the responsibilities of the Council became wider. The resolution was a little bit transformed. It became more all-encompassing in the aspects of prevention of genocide, in the struggle against the genocide, against the denial of the genocide. And it got Armenia a real spot on the international arena as in the forefront of the prevention of genocide and as the key actor in the United Nations family, as a country who is actively fighting against the crime. Certainly, this is connected also with the fact that Armenia is the representative of a nation country that has survived genocide. And all of the UN nation states accept also the fact that Armenia is the leader of this struggle, is the leader of this fight. There is another example that I can bring. There is a UN procedure called UPR, Universal Periodic Review, that every country undergoes a human rights, full assessment of their human rights agenda. And Armenia has taken up also a specific role within this UPR recommendations, following up very actively that countries do sign or do ratify the Genocide Convention, and therefore trying to get a universal ratification for this convention. So this was the work done on the international arena. But locally, as you know, Armenia hosted already the first two global forums, which were held in respectively in 2015 and 2016 on the eve of April 24 commemorations. This year we have decided to reshape totally the idea of hosting the global forums, and to invite the forum on December 9, which is exactly the day of the 70th anniversary of the adoption of the convention, continued on the next day. And December 10 is also a very significant day in history. It is the 70th anniversary of the adoption of Universal Declaration on Human Rights. So that's the two most important human rights instruments that were adopted 70 years ago will be commemorated, will be celebrated here in Armenia, and Armenia stands very strong in its position to tackle the issue of genocide and to its full capacity not to allow any further happenings of this devious scourge.
Since genocide is committed by governments, theoretically, and also that or perpetrated with the inaction of governments, and since also states cannot intervene in internal affairs of other governments, how can the world prevent crimes of genocide?
You know, probably the word prevent exactly is the key word in how we can stop genocides happening. Prevention is a wider word, and we understand the prevention as every step that humanity can take in order not to allow occurrences of genocide. Prevention would mean, and actually one of the subjects of this, the Third Global Forum, is prevention through education, is the fact that people, human beings, school children, graduates and undergraduates, everybody has to learn the history of genocide, has to learn what is unacceptable. But also you have to educate people, you have to educate part of the society, the human beings within the society, with a sense of understanding of what is important, what is unacceptable. You cannot educate children with the concepts of racism, discrimination, xenophobia, because that is exactly what puts the seeds of hatred, that puts the seeds of future genocides. If we are able to prevent such hate speech, such racistic, fascistic or xenophobic statements within society, this is the exact part of prevention that we can contribute towards the prevention of genocide. Because the people who are not being stopped at the right time, when they start propagating against any other minority, any other group, ethnic, racial, national, whatever, that becomes the source of the future genocides. If we remember very well the story, the saying that Hitler has mentioned, that who remembers about the Armenians who were massacred. But exactly the fact that if after the Armenian genocide of 1915, the international community had taken much more serious steps in criticizing, in punishing the perpetrator, I'm pretty confident that genocides wouldn't have occurred. They wouldn't have occurred in the same way or in the same manner. Today, even, it's not too late. It's never late. I mean, you have to educate people to be tolerant. You have to educate people to be unacceptable towards genocide, to be unacceptable towards denial of genocide, because denial of genocide is the last phase of genocide. So prevention is the key word here.
If Armenians do not connect what happened in Armenia to Armenians with what's happening around the world today, we have examples with the Rohingyas genocide or the Yazidis, for example. Why should the 1915 genocide remain relevant to anyone right now?
Well, let me disagree here, because we do connect ourselves exactly because of the fact that we are a nation that has survived genocide. We take very close to our hearts any instances of genocide occurring all around the world. And Armenia, on a governmental level, on a parliamentary level, has recognized has very been vocal on the issues of genocide of Yazidis, the genocide of Assyrians, genocide of Greek Pontus. So Armenia is taking these issues very seriously. And the first step in taking legislative action, government action, is exactly the fact that we take these things close to our hearts. We relate everything to the history that we have gone through. And having survived, having seen things which are intolerable to survive, we exactly do not wish, or we cannot wish, anyone to go through these scourges.
Let's go back in time. This week, is the 7th anniversary of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide. So this convention recognized genocide as a crime against, under the international law. The convention was adopted, as we said, in 1948, so it was after the Armenian genocide. And we had a talk in our studio with two experts of genocide, Melanie O'Brien and Elisa van Udenforgi, who study genocide. And Melanie, who's a lecturer in the international law, told us that the cases of genocide that occurred before the adoption of the convention cannot be called crimes, because back in time the word crime did not exist for the genocide. What do you think about that?
Well, thank you for the quotes. Let's start with the fact that the word genocide, when it was coined by Raphael Lemkin, by the way, I'll use this opportunity to inform that Yerevan will have a Raphael Lemkin, already has a Raphael Lemkin Street, the opening of which will take place during the forum. We really owe a lot to Raphael Lemkin, a Polish lawyer of Jewish origin, who has coined the term genocide. And when he was asked by the UN and he was also one of the creators, the authors of the Convention on the Prevention, Punishment for the Crime of Genocide in 1948, when he was asked, what does the word genocide mean? And he, well, apart from explaining it linguistically, he explained it on specific examples. This is what happened to Armenians back in 1915. So if we look at the Genocide Convention, if we pay attention to the 4 key factors that contribute to genocide, they exactly relate to what has happened in 1915. So this is the exact point that what happened in 1915 is totally corresponding to the terms of the Genocide Convention. So there is no way that we can deny it being genocide, and certainly the fact that the term or the convention was made available only years after the commitment of Armenian genocide does not mean that whatever happened in the past cannot be characterized as a crime. It has taken place, unfortunately this is true, and the reality is that we have to look into it not only as some are mentioned historically or juridically, but also legally and politically.
And then the last question, also, so this year's forum is dedicated to prevention against crime of genocide through education, culture, and museums. What for the next global forums? What could be the main focus? What do you propose?
Well, that is one of the issues that will be discussed now. The theme of this current forum was adopted at the end of the second global forum, which was prevention through education. We have decided to add to it also the cultural aspect, because not only you have to educate people on the history of genocide, not only you have to educate people on the unacceptability of intolerance, but you have to do that also through means of culture. There have been many instances of depicting genocide on screen, in cinema, in movies, in music, and I do believe that all of these cultural expressions of fighting the crime of genocide are very important, because there are certain nations in the society that, well, let's say, would not pay attention to legal terms, would not pay attention to the history books, but they are much more receptive to something modern, to some modern means of showcasing the history, dark pages of history, let's say. And that could be the movies, that could be music. We have witnessed perfectly well what the results of the movies such as Arat or Promise, or Serge Tankian's activities, and in general SOAD's activities in the fight against genocide. And I do believe that this is exactly the piece where this education and culture go hand in hand. Another important aspect of the part of the global forum, the third global forum, will be also the panel dedicated to the fight against the genocide through museums. Because museums, especially the museums of remembrance, museums of Holocaust, genocide, they contribute a lot, not only to teaching, not only to telling people what has happened, but also to educating people what has been incorrect in the life of the society that we have come to such a step, to such a phase. I do believe that the next, the deliberations of this forum will be very interesting. We have changed a little bit the concept, as I said, from the dates, but also the fact that the first two forums had over 1,000 participants and about 15-20, let's say, foreign specialists, genocide scholars. This time we have put the accent on the opposite. We will have about 250 participants only in general, but about 40 genocide scholars, people who represent museums of remembrance, of memorial sites, and the results will be, well, I'm pretty sure will be very promising, and one of the decisions taken will be also deciding on the future steps of the next global forum. It took us about over a year and a half to prepare this 3 days event. I do believe that the next forum will take place not earlier than in 2 years' time, but the subjects will be free to deliberations this time. We are confident that our moderators and speakers will contribute to it, and we'll have a successful discussion which will contribute in general to the prevention of the crime of genocide.
Thank you, Mr. Kazhoyan, for this talk. Thank you for watching, and continue to follow CivilNet.